Will this give me good enough audio? Ah! Yeah, maybe it will. World building. The dreaded word of storytelling that allows people to waste time almost endlessly. The addiction of D&D preppers, and yet it is still very important in our real storytelling work. But today, I'm gonna do something different. I'm not gonna tell you how to world build. I'm gonna do it right now, and you're gonna get to see exactly how much time you should be spending on this shit. If you learned something while you're here, you know what to do. Hit the like and subscribe buttons and the dreaded bell. So, let's begin. For sake of example, I'm going to be using a world I've already created, the world of No Stone Unturned, my video game. I'm going to be showing you how I form a new area of this world, from basics to the most intense details, and we're going to do it all in under an hour. Let's freaking get on with it, shall we? So first off, here's a map of my world. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Anyone who's played the demo of No Stone Unturned will know this little area and know who exactly this is. But we then move on to other locations. We have a house here, we have a town here, and then we have a little place called the Burrows. And this is what I'm going to be designing today. So I'm going to create this area as if this is not part of a pre-existing universe, so you can see exactly how I would go from the bare bones and build something up. It's worth adding that you should already have a story by this point. You need a character who wants things and reasons that they can't get them. That is the first step along this journey, and you should be focusing on that first, okay? But from there, we can move on. So, let's begin with the basics. Name, age, past. If you have seen my video on how to make memorable characters, this is the basic structure that I use for characters too. So, the Burrows is the name. The age is, in animal years, gonna be close to something like 300 years old. It's been settled by cave-dwelling species. Generally speaking, when we think about the past of an area or a location, we are thinking about the history of the people who went there. What did they do and why did they do it? But we can also think about this from an ecological and terrain point of view. So, what is the terrain like? Well, as I say, it's cave dwellers, so there are lots of caves / canyons, meaning it is arid, it is dry, it is infertile land. You will not be growing any crops on that land. So because of this, we can now form a history, and we don't need to go too in depth. I'm not going to go into the different levels of exporting and importing that these people would do in order to survive, because that's not needed for my storyline at all. What that is for fan fiction writers who want to embellish on the world. And I will leave just enough breadcrumbs for them to create something, but I'm not going to do that work myself. That's pointless. So now that we've thought about the basics, we can now move on to an important part of any place. It's culture. Here we need to answer a few questions about the past, the present, and the future of this place. So, how was it formed? Why was it formed that way? What is the current issue that the people of this place are dealing with? And why can't they stop it? And then for the future, what is coming next? And who will make it happen? So, we know the ending here is Hero Detective Cox, because this is coming from a pre-existing game, and I know I said I wouldn't use things to build up on, but I can't lie about who I know is going to be solving this issue. So, how was this culture formed? I like to think that the people who are living in these caves are forming a small, close-knit community. Maybe because they are cave dwellers, they are using gem rocks and emeralds and things like that, and they use precious metals as their source of income. So we're going to put precious metals / gems. We really don't need to go into more than that, but it formed small, fearful community, because people who live in caves are fearful. They're fearful of something. That's why they're in the cave. And why was it formed this way? Why are they fearful? It would be nice to have prey, because they are animals. So there is a prey, a predator. There is a predator out and about, and they need to hide from that predator. This is a great segue into what is the issue they're dealing with. It is the predator, the large predator that is making their lives horrible. Now, why can't they do anything about it is a really important one. Maybe they are weak. Maybe they are malnourished. You know, they are malnourished. That makes sense because they are in caves and they are in kind of an arid, dry desert with infertile land. Malnourishment is going to be rife there. So in the future, what comes next? Well, it would seem obvious now that the predator must die. Must die or be slain. Be slayed, I'll put, because who the hell knows how to spell slain? So from here we have built a kind of basic storyline of this place, a overarching narrative of where we want this place to move to over the time in our storyline. This, because we're making a game right now, allows us to make quests, stories, NPCs that can fit inside this setting, that can not only fit inside this setting, but service this story better. So let's move on. We've touched on culture and the conflicts these people are going to be dealing with, but now we need to look at more specifically who. People. They live in caves, we know this. They haven't got food, we know this. But there needs to be people that we can care about and things that make us care about these people. So how can we make somebody who is in a cave world with no food relatable? Well, let's look at it in two different stages, strengths and weaknesses. And let's focus first on the weaknesses. They are much more interesting. We already established that these people are fearful. So being controlled by fear is a big weakness for them. And it's also a massively relatable thing. Everybody has a certain level of fear, and that fear is natural and meant to happen. And in Western civilization, those fears used to be built on real worries, like our families going unfed. But due to certain things like welfare culture and everything else, we now don't have to worry about the same level of things that we used to worry about in the past. But that fear is natural, it is still present in us, and it's the reason, in my opinion, there is so much mental health concerns at the moment. Fear is a very relatable feeling for almost every single human in the world. We fear something, and that fear keeps us in line and keeps us on the path that we are meant to go on. For instance, I have a very healthy fear of going into an open sea with sharks in it. But if I was fearful of a picture of a shark, suddenly this fear can become a weakness that can be used against me. And so we will say fearful, but overly fearful. Overly so, because it allows them to be controlled, and that is a weakness. Another one, because they are malnourished, we could say they are genuinely weak. Weak, not strong. They can't face their fear because they are so weak, this predator is going to snatch them up. But they do have certain strengths. They are resourceful. We know that they are able to get precious gems out of the mines, which means they are probably pretty intelligent. Maybe they're kind of intellectual hermits that stay at home, kind of like gamery. So we're going to give them gamer vibes. Here we have established something really important for our character, subtext. These characters are not gamers, but we can make them feel like gamers right now that we know that that is our aim. How can we do that? Well, really relatable feelings for gamers can be relatable feelings for this character. For instance, things that gamers feel weaknesses on. Loneliness. It is a massive problem in the gaming community because, generally speaking, when you do a single player activity, even if you are, engaging with people in an audio capacity, you're not getting human interaction, which is very important. Strengths of this character echo what we're already doing. Resourceful, intelligent. We can now add strategic, but I like to stay in the weaknesses still. So let's move on. One more weakness. Let's think. Gamers, what do they generally feel? They are at home all the time. They what would a gamer struggle with that is more deep and more succinct? Maybe we could make a comment on the fact that gamers struggle a lot of the time to grow up. So there is a subtext we can apply to these characters that they have the abilities they need, but it's only the fear holding them back. In fact, this is neither a strength nor a weakness. It's just a major point. Potential. The potential of these characters suddenly allow us to feel a connection to them, and we can now think of things visually that can be interesting and can fit this gamer vibe aesthetic. Maybe they all have really nice chairs, Maybe they have nice chairs, but I'm getting ahead of myself. What we now can do is move on to the next section. From people, we can move on to architecture. Architecture and product design. This is something very simple, but it allows us to understand the visuals of this world, and it can be a great way to impart subtext. So for instance, if we wanted to think of gamer aesthetics, we would think of headphones. We would think of these fancy gaming chairs that have, holes in them and stuff, because airflow is important. I don't know why they have holes in. I don't even know how to draw one, it seems. Okay, that's a chair, right? Every time I draw on this channel, I realize that I need to be more patient. I'm just gonna do a weird drawing for chair like this. There you go, there's a chair. The gaming chair was too difficult. So we can now build architecture and product design from these things. We know that we want it to be a cave dwelling species. We know that it's gonna be very arid and dry, but we also know that we want to impart a kind of subtext of these are gamers. So we can think of things like computer screens, big hardware components, and this is a great time for me to talk about what No Stone is. No Stone Unturned is a world filled with animals that are living in the remnants of human waste. They have taken things like shoes, Lego, and they have built a town where they could now exist and live. And they have formed a kind of god, which is the giants, being the humans who have left all of these gifts for them in their forest homeland. So, because of that, my architecture can be entirely giant pieces of machinery. So the way I would now think about this is it's a canyon, maybe it like snakes around and has different places, and inside there are caves that we can enter, and inside a cave there can be lots of high-tech machinery. There can be refineries to turn the precious gems and metals into items. This can be kind of the industrial zone of my world. Suddenly I have a residential zone right next door to an industrial zone. And considering that I have worked and spent a lot of time in industrial areas in the UK, I can inform this with layouts of things like warehouses, industrial buildings that will fit this vibe perfectly. Because of this, I can now form a brief. So let's move on to brief. When I set a brief for something as big as a location, I want to understand everything that needs to be done on that level and scale. So for my video game, I'm going to need artwork. I'm also going to need voice acting for all the characters. I'm going to need sound design and music in order to give the correct ambience and feeling to the place. And we can now focus on exactly what I want to put in each brief on this section. I'm not going to write out a full brief right now because I feel like that would be a waste of time. You can write a brief because you know what you need to make. I need a certain amount of art, I need a certain amount of voice acting, I need a certain amount of music. That is what I think of. But you might think of something totally different. Maybe you're just working on a novel and this step isn't important for you. But for anybody who is leading a creative team, this is essential. So in terms of artwork, I want to think of dry. I want to think of tech. I want to think of canyons. And when I give my brief, I want to explain the size of the map, maybe how many people are going to be in this, how many towns. Get your numbers sorted. These don't matter. It could be 10, it could be 5, it could be anything, it doesn't matter. But it has to fit what your story is about. How many people exist in your world? Make that many houses. Duh. With voice acting, I want to think about these people. I want to think about gamer vibes. Nerdy, but also thirsty. They're in a dry, arid area. They're thirsty. Oh, they're thirsty. They're not thirsty, are they? They're thirsty. For some reason, the word thirsty there just doesn't fit right in my brain, but oh well. And then for sound design and music, we want to think of arid climates again. This is going to be so stereotypical, but if you're making a Western story, generally speaking, when people think of arid climates, they think of Arabic music, or they think of Indian music. You can think of these things as ways of imparting tone, but if you want to change the vibe and do it your own way, that's totally on you. For instance, everything in No Stone Unturned is based on jazz, swing, and psychedelic funk, because I love those types of music. So the way of creating arid jazz would be getting rid of all of the wet instruments. So for instance, I would consider piano, violin to be wet, and I would think of drums and like those rattles, those things that you can, you know, the little frog things? Is this just, maybe this is just my like school, I don't know. Do you know the frog things that I'm talking about? Those wooden frogs that it has like a hole in its mouth for the stick. You take it out and you go, It's like a... I don't know how to describe it. Comment below if you know what that's called. So once you've briefed, you can then move on to a finished product and you can begin the most important step, refining. Yes, just like those weird nerds in the burrows are doing with precious metals, you can refine your story down to its core elements and push those elements as far as possible in this process. A great thing to add on top of this would be environmental storytelling. Look how, as your story changes, this world could change and it could adapt. This is world building. If you are going further than this, if you are making lore, and you are going into the history of your world and what has formed it, please just ask yourself one question every single time you do something. How does this make the story better? How does this make the core truth of my work better? If it doesn't, then it might just be entertainment instead of storytelling. And maybe you want to make a very entertaining thing. That's totally fine. But be aware of how much time you spend on making entertainment versus stories, because stories are far more important and they connect to people more. So, that is it. You've gone from an idea in your juicy brain sack to a land that has been developed over time because of something, and you've created a population in this world that can relate to your audience. That is how you should be world building, in my opinion. Maybe you want to do it a different way. Maybe you have an opinion on that. Maybe you can comment it. But if you just had a good time and learned something while you're here, then please feel free to like and subscribe and hit that dreaded bell. That's all from me until the next video, so I will see you there. Goodbye.